Hey folks, David Stewart here. I haven't done any content on vanilla WoW in a while, and I thought it'd be a great time to jump back in and do some because we have Chronos 3 opening in a couple of days. And this year we might actually get some official Blizzard vanilla WoW servers. Let's cross our fingers and hope that it happens at some point here. What I thought I'd do with this video is just talk about all the classes. There were 9 classes in vanilla, and talk a little bit about what you can expect if you're going to level these and if you're going to play them in game. Because a lot of your assumptions about what you might want to play if you join this game later than the 1 to 60 experience might be incorrect, because the game was a little bit different at 1 to 60 and not every spec was viable, and classes operated a little bit differently than how they worked in a more modern version of World of Warcraft. So with that in mind, let's jump into it, and let's start with this classic class. This is the warrior, female cow wearing tier 2. Please don't roll a female cow, but this is a very, very popular class. In fact, in every private server that I've seen, the warrior is the most popular class. Like 30 to 50% of all characters are warriors. And there's probably a couple reasons for this. Might be more bank alts, because it's literally the first class for most. It's a human warrior or an orc warrior. But it's a really popular class because it's really good, and people remember how good it was back in the day. A lot of PvP videos were made back in the day that had, you know, rank 14 warrior just crushing people with the Grand Marshal's Claymore or the High Warlord Axe. And people want to be that crushing wrecking ball in the battlegrounds. And they remember how cool the armor looked and how hard it was to kill warriors. The reality is it's a little bit different than that. And that big portion of people who roll warrior often never get to 60. The 1 to 60 experience on warrior, having leveled a warrior to 60 in vanilla, is pretty brutal. It's a pretty difficult experience, and there's a bunch of reasons for it. Main one is you have no way to really stop damage coming into you. Even though you wear heavy armor, you wear plate and mail, you have to do all your damage in melee, and you're not like a rogue that can stun lock. You're not like any ranged class that can kite things around or keep them at range and reduce the damage coming into you. So if you pull 2 mobs, especially at lower levels, it's like you better start running to the graveyard so that you have less of a corpse run back, because pulling 2 mobs can mean death on a warrior if you don't have a lot of gear. And of course, if you're leveling, you don't have a lot of gear. It's the most gear dependent class in World of Warcraft, which means even if you get it to 60, it's going to be terrible until you get a lot of epic gear for it that really ramps up its power. And once it has a lot of power, it's very powerful if you're playing in a group. So in that battleground situation where you have a priest to heal you, yes, it does has a ton of damage output, and because of that plate armor, it's very, very resistant to physical damage. It can zoom around the battlefield with intercept and charge and do a lot of damage to casters, and it can have big crits with those 2-handed weapons if you're running arms, and of course Mortal Strike is great, but you have to have a lot of gear for that to be viable. Now, if you have a lot of gear in the PvE environment, you can also be top DPS as Fury. But likewise, that's hard to grind that gear out. Actually harder than getting this set here, which is the tier 2 set, because you have to assemble a DPS set out of a lot of off pieces in most cases, because these tier sets tend to focus on the protection warrior. A lot of people roll warrior because they want to tank. And in fact, in vanilla, the only tanking class that you should really consider is warrior. Yes, paladins can kind of tank. They can tank leveling up, but they're really quite bad at it at level 60. They're very suboptimal, and getting gear that will allow you to do it even at a very low level is extremely difficult to get. So if you're even considering tanking a little bit, forget about Druid, forget about Paladin, just roll a warrior. The problem with being a tank is, yes, it's easy to find dungeon groups leveling up, and it's easy to find dungeon groups at level 60 as a tank, because every group needs that tank. They need that tank to grab the mobs and hold aggro and keep everyone else from dying. However, if you're thinking about raiding, keep in mind that most raid groups will only need 1 to 3 tanks, including just 1 main tank, for 90% of all content in vanilla. And the only real exception is the 4 horsemen at Nax, where I think you need 8 geared tanks. So what will probably happen is that if you manage to get into a raiding guild, they'll have you be DPS, some DPS hybrid where you can off tank if necessary and maybe gear you up, but that's probably the best you can hope for. You're probably not going to main tank. Somebody that either the guild leader or somebody the guild leader knows. It's a pretty coveted spot. So it's really hard to access the end game as a warrior at a high level in the game, because it's so overpopulated, because it's so difficult to get gear and be good at it, and because the role area of tank is so limited. It's a class that I caution you against playing unless you really want to play warrior. And if you really want to play warrior, I guarantee you'll probably find a way to make it happen. But if you're looking for something that's going to give you easy access to groups like in modern WoW, if you have a tank, obviously that's a great thing to have. Tanks are in super high demand. However, in vanilla, while they're in high demand for dungeons and things, not so high demand in raids, not as high demand as you would think. So keep that in mind with warrior. Otherwise, it's a super powerful class. I leveled one and I loved playing it, and I was determined to level it all the way up. It's probably the slowest leveling class, perhaps with the exception of Paladin, and it can be slower depending on how well you play. If you play really badly, you're going to be corpse running a lot. It's going to be slower than a Paladin, which is basically unkillable. And if you play really well or you play in a group, then it can be extremely fast because you do so much damage, you mitigate so much. Your main resource is rage, which is generated by things hitting you. So at the end of killing a mob, you're basically ready to kill the next one, especially if you have a priest just casting renew on you and wanding. You can actually level really efficiently that way. But doing it by yourself solo, which is what most people end up doing, it's pretty tough. I recommend if you do roll warrior, pick up alchemy, and then you can use some health pots on yourself, which will make things a lot easier. Let's go on to the next one. This is hunter. This is the class that I rated on at level 60. And it's a good class. It is the ranged physical DPS class. It's a little weird though, and you should know about this. The 1 to 10 experience is a little bit slow and annoying because you don't have a pet. Once you get to level 10, you get a pet that can hold aggro on mobs, and you just sit there and shoot it. This is one of the lesser active DPS classes in a raid environment because depending on what kind of weapon you have to weave aimed shots in between auto shots, and if you have too fast a weapon, you just don't use aim shot. And arcane shot doesn't do enough damage, and serpent sting won't stay up on the mob because there's only 8 raid debuff slots in the new Chronos 3. So you pretty much auto shot and multi shot, and you don't multi shot if they're sheeps. So there's many cases where you go into a raid as a hunter and you're just auto shotting. However, this is the fastest leveling class. This class you can level faster than any class, and I've leveled a bunch of them. And the reason is because you have that pet to tank. Hunter pets are really versatile and really good. They take a little bit of work to teach all their skills because you have to go out and tame other beasts. So you tame a beast out in the world, it becomes your pet. But then you have to put it in the stable, go tame other beasts to learn their skills and teach them to your pet so your pet can do the next level of claw damage and can have higher output in general. And that's something that you just have to kind of figure out with vanilla hunters. They're very different from modern hunters. The other thing is you have melee weapons, you have a dead zone. So if a mob gets too close to you, you can't shoot it with your arrows, you have to attack it with your swords and use Raptor Strike and some other some other melee stuff. And I know melee hunters in beta were a thing, and they weren't a thing again, I think, until Legion. But in this version of the game, you have to be able to use both. There's a really high kind of skill ceiling, I guess, on a hunter. The epic hunter weapon quest that you get out of Molten Core involves kiting these elite demons through all kinds of zones. You have to kite them, which means you're keeping them at range by slowing them, running faster than them. It requires a lot of skill, and some skill that isn't very obvious when you first pick up the game, and really a skill that I don't know too many modern hunters bother keeping up. But you have to be able to run and then basically twist around and fire backwards while jumping in order to get off all of your shots, to keep aggro on something and do damage to it as you slowly run around the zone in circles. That's to get your Rockdalar and Lockdalar epic bow and epic staff combo, which is a really, really cool quest. They're a good class. You have to spend money on ammo, and you have one less bag. And that means that you have to be a little bit more careful with your bag space, and you have to spend money on arrows, but otherwise they're one of the fastest leveling classes. They're the best solo class in my opinion, so if you're planning on playing by yourself, not with a guild too much, you don't have time to raid, Hunter's a great choice. You can always operate by yourself, you can go into battlegrounds by yourself, you can basically do anything that you want in the game by yourself, including grinding out and crafting your own gear. You can solo elite dragons. I made my own gear back at level 60 in retail by soloing elite dragons, getting the black dragon scales, and making the gear, and that was with greens. So very, very powerful class. A little bit overpopulated from time to time, but don't let that stop you if you really want to be able to be powerful as a solo player without having to rely on a guild. To me, the vanilla experience is very much about guilds, but everybody wants to play differently. So if you're going to play solo, then Hunter's a great choice. Next, let's talk about the rogue. The Rogue is the most efficient quester in the game, in my opinion, and the reason is because it has the most overpowered single skill in the game, that's stealth. The ability to turn invisible and avoid what conflicts you want, and choose to initiate combat when you choose, is an extremely powerful spell, and it's still, in my opinion, very, very overpowered in the current version of the game as well. So what's cool about questing on a rogue is that you can skip all the mobs that you don't have to kill and just kill those that you need to kill. You have lots of fun things to do with a rogue. You have an entirely unique set of skills that you can bring to bear, including picking locks. So you don't need to have keys to lots of things. You can bring a rogue along and he could pick the lock to certain doors instead of having to go get a key, which makes running certain dungeons a little bit interesting. They can also pick lockboxes, and so you can make a little bit of money as a rogue opening up people's lockboxes in Ironforge. They can pick pockets, and you can find all kinds of weird junk box treasures doing that. Usually it's poison stuff. They have their own profession called poison making, which is interesting, and they have some really cool class quests. In PvP, they are the most powerful 1v1 PvP class, in my opinion, and if you're skilled at rogue, you can be nigh unbeatable in open world in a 1v1 situation, because you choose when to attack, you choose who you attack, and if things go badly, you can vanish and get away. And you can pretty much, if things end up going really badly, you can kind of bail and get away and save yourself. So to me, the best open world PvP class is Rogue. It's a good questing class as well. It's a little squishy when it comes to just grinding as like combat or something like that. But if you want to do quests primarily, I think Rogue is an excellent choice. The big problem with Rogue in terms of server population is that there's always more of them than needed. They really don't have a lot of raid utility. You know, a warrior, you need a tank. A hunter, it's ranged, and ranged always does okay. But hunters themselves don't bring a ton of raid utility. One more thing I'll say about Hunter 2 is that there's three different skill trees. You're pretty much going to raid as marksman, just so you know. Beast Mastery is good for leveling, but you don't really do it in raids. Your pet dies too easy. You don't have all the things that you have now. It's going to be marks, and then there's a bunch of different specs of hunters that you may have in a raid. Everyone may come with a different set of talents arranged to buff each other. So one person may have True Shot Aura, and one person may have Improved Hunter's Mark. You may have all these different things so that it buffs damage between different hunters, but don't expect to play survival at all, really. Survival's okay in PvP because you have like Wyvern Sting, but mostly it's going to be marksmanship dominated in PvE, and it's going to be Beast Mastery for leveling, but you can level as marksmanship. I leveled my last hunter as marks and enjoyed it tremendously. Rogue, likewise, you're usually either like assassination or combat when it comes to doing raid damage. Though subtlety, you have to spec into it to be able to sap without breaking stealth. All the trees are kind of used in Rogue, but I never raided on Rogue, so I couldn't tell you which one is going to be the best or be the optimal one. I get the feeling that it's combat. I see more combat rogues running around than assassination rogues. Let's move on. Next one, Priest. Priest is a class that you can pick if you want to have a raid spot. And if you were going to roll in the Alliance faction, I command you to roll Dwarf, because you get Fear Ward, which is a spell that will keep the tank from being feared in Onyxia or anywhere else. It's incredibly powerful. Fear is a spell that's used a lot in vanilla raid content. So if you have a Dwarf Priest, you're almost guaranteed to get a free raid spot, even if you're under-geared or underskilled. Every group needs a healer. Priests are probably the best healers in vanilla, the most versatile. They have a shield which prevents damage. They have a heal over time spell and renew, and then they have a bunch of direct heals which all function really well together. They're a great class for main tank healing, and they're a great class in general to take to a raid. So if you're looking to pick a class that's going to give you the best chance of getting into a raid team, I think Priest is probably the best chance. However, they're a little bit annoying to level, and that's because you have to do this weird combination of specs that you change as you level. And I've leveled a Priest in vanilla. You start off with Wand spec, actually, because your Wand does a ton of damage at low levels. And your main thing is pulling a mob with dots, fearing it with your lowest level fear, because that's mana efficient, and then just wanting it to death. And you're going to do that basically till after you get Mind Flay even, because once you get Mind Flay, you still won't be mana efficient enough to just dot things and Mind Flay them to death. You're kind of going to end up doing the same thing until you get Shadow Form, and then the leveling gets a little bit easier, and you can do a lot more damage to monsters out in the world and get on up to 60 a little bit faster. You're probably going to level a Shadow. Healing, you can do Disc or Holy. Holy is a little bit more common. Discipline healing exists as well for things like Power Infusion, which was a really important buff for other classes like Warlock and Mage. So you can pick either one. Discipline plays a little bit different in vanilla than it does in a modern WoW. Discipline's a little more focused on single target healing in modern WoW. In this one, it's still focused on single target healing, but so is Holy. It's not a big AoE healing class in vanilla. That great class to pick if you want to find. Always have a group and always have a raid spot. Once you get to 60 and you're a healer, they're a little bit more annoying to play simply because when you're spec'd Holy or you're spec'd Discipline, it's a little bit harder to go out and grind mobs. So being able to play with friends is a big plus, just like with the Warrior. Next class, Mage. Mage is a pretty popular class on most servers, and there's a lot of reasons why. It's probably the strongest ranged DPS class, this ranged damage class, and it gets really powerful towards the end levels once you're able to use fire spells. When you go into Molten Core, everything's immune to fire, so you're doing Frost. Once you get into other instances and you can spec fire and you can get those ignite ticks rolling, sometimes the Mage DPS is incredible. Mages have some of the best tools in the game when you're spec Frost to play in PvP, because you can counter rogues, you can counter a lot of people when it comes to keeping your distance. However, I think they tend to fall behind a little bit in PvP compared to some other stronger classes like Hunter and Rogue and Warrior, and of course the healers. So if you want to play PvP, they're not a bad choice. They're a great range DPS class, especially if you're in a group and you have lots of ways to get away from melee, like Blink and Frost Nova and things like that. And I think the Frost spec is actually quite a bit of fun. You don't have a pet in vanilla. I don't think that came until much later in the game. Mostly you're going to be Frost if you're leveling or you want a PvP, because that gives you the most options for controlling the distance of monsters. And you're probably going to level Fire after Molten Core. And most people don't play Arcane, but there is a special Arcane Palm Pyro spec that was very popular for PvP, which is once you get like the Zandalarian Hero Charm trinket, you link this all things together. You Arcane Power, Presence of Mind, and then you Pyroblast, which is your longest cast spell and your most powerful. It gives you an instant cast spell that will kill a bunch of people at max level. So every 2 minutes you could run up to somebody and just kill them. And that was kind of an interesting tool to use in something like Warsong Gulch. You could just kill a flag carrier. So Mage is cool. It brings a lot of interesting utility because you can teleport to all the other cities. So if you want to get around the game quickly, Mage is the best choice. They're pretty fast levelers in my opinion. They do pretty well. I've leveled one Mage. And you can also give people portals, and that's really useful too. You can give people mana, water, and you can give them bread, although that gets a little bit annoying in a raid when everyone and their mom wants some water. If you're not a mage, make a good friend with a mage, because you get a little bit annoyed always conjuring water for people. And then in fact people use mods to just automatically trade water because it becomes such an annoying thing in raids. This is prior to them making the little table, the refreshment table that you can click and just get some like water, mana, food, like they did later, as far as convenience. So great class. All the classes have their own flavor. Mage, certainly in vanilla. By the way, Mage is the class that you can use if you want. Once ZG comes out, you can use a well-geared Mage to make ridiculous amounts of gold, because you can solo farm a bunch of the elites inside of ZG. So you make a raid with somebody, and it's even better if the raid has, like, I think had bosses cleared out. I don't remember if the trash respawns, but you go into a raid and you kill like the gators and stuff in ZG, and they drop bijous and coins, and you just gather those up. And you can kite them around using your blizzard. You'll make the gold back for respecking just from selling the bijous, and you can over time make a lot of gold. I had a friend who just did that. He made like 5,000 or 10,000 gold well before Burning Crusade came out. He didn't have to do any kind of extra quests at 70. He just bought his epic flying mount and away he went. And of course he had enough gold at that time that he could pay a guild to like take him on a tier 3 run and just give him gear. It was kind of an interesting, powerful economic situation that you have access to with a mage. Next class, Warlock. Warlocks are a great class for leveling solo because you have pets. You have a variety of pets. They're strong. Warlocks have a way to use health stones to resurrect themselves. They have dots and fear, which you can kill 4 or 5 mobs at a time if you're good at Warlock. At max level, they're not quite as fun to play in a raid situation. You mostly end up spamming Shadow Bolt. And the reason is in vanilla, you only could have so many debuffs on a boss. It was originally 8, and when Chronos launches, it'll be 8. And then it moved up to 16 with the launch of Zul'Gurub. So that still probably wasn't enough for you to keep up all your dots if you were playing Affliction. So I think you ended up playing, I don't remember the exact spec. I could tell you maybe later, but you end up basically spamming Shadow Bolt, and that's what you do in raids. It ends up being a little bit boring, other than the utility you bring. Now, Warlocks bring a lot of utility to a group. You have Summon, so every group, it's always going to be like, let's get the Warlock, and then we can summon other people to the dungeon. Summoning's very useful. Health Stone's very useful. Soul Stone is very useful. So those 3 things are extremely useful, but you're going to be farming a bunch of shards, and you always have 1 less bag. You give up 1 of your bags, you get a soul bag to hold your soul shards, which you use to make all of those different items. And so you be aware that you're going to have less bags. However, you do get a mount at level 40 that's unique to your class and is essentially free. And you also get one at level 60. However, if you're playing on Chronos 3, which is going to have gated content, you won't be able to get that free epic mount. It's not exactly free because there's still quest items and stuff you have to buy. I think it's cheaper and easier than buying 1,000 gold mount. You won't get that for a few months. So bear that in mind if you're going to roll on Chronos 3. But overall, it's a great class. It's a great farming class. It's an excellent class to play solo. It's very fun in PvP because of fear. Fear is very, very powerful. However, it's very susceptible to like rogues and warriors because of the fact that you have undead rogues that can just break fear. And of course, you have stun locks and things like that. So it's great in PvP. It does have its weaknesses. Not quite as interesting to play in raids as some other classes, but in general, most classes have a pretty low set of things they're doing to create damage compared to Modern WoW. Modern WoW, you're spamming a bunch of different buttons and a bunch of different skills to do damage to a boss. In Vanilla WoW, it's more about managing your resources. You have a limited number of spells you use, but you're keeping track of your mana, you're watching your position, you're watching your health, you're bandaging when you need to, because that's the way raids were. They were you couldn't rely on healers necessary to heal you. In fact, you'd get told often, you'd be like, hey, heal me. And the healer would say, bandage. I'm healing tanks. I'm healing important people. You bandage yourself. So keep that in mind. Let's move on. Druid. Druid is one of the most underpopulated classes in Vanilla WoW, and I think this is the one I'm going to play next time I get into playing. I'm probably just going to play casually because I don't really have time to do the raiding thing. But Druids are a great class at 60. If you play Druid in one of the more modern versions of the game, be aware that there's no place for Feral Druids at level 60, and there's no place for Balanced Druids anywhere in the game. Balanced Druids are considered useless and terrible. We call them Umkins. Their mana is terrible, and if you level as a Boomkin or an Umkin, you may find yourself constantly drinking, and it gets a little bit annoying. But you do want to level Feral. Feral's a great spec to level solo. You can stealth past mobs. You can do a lot of damage to them with your physical attacks. You could pop out, heal, go back to Cat. It's a very, very, very efficient leveling spec if you want to level as Feral. Once you get to max level at level 60, you will be Resto. That is the only actual place for a Druid in a raid. I am not aware of any guilds that are really, and if it's your guild and it's your friends, they might be willing to try to gear you for Feral or for even Balance, but I really wouldn't count on it. You need to expect to be playing Resto. All the gear is set up to play Resto as well, to play Restoration and to be healing the raid. When you're healing, you do have some really interesting heals. You have 2 different hots, one which has a healing portion at the beginning and then healing over time. You have Regrowth, which is that one. Then you have Rejuvenation, which is just a big hot. You have Swiftman, which is an interesting way to heal. And then, of course, you have one of the biggest heals in the game in Healing Touch. So it's an interesting spec to play. Now, of course, you're the class that has Battle Res, so raids are always going to want Druids because that Battle Res can save a wipe. You can Battle Res the tank if something bad happens, and you can continue on and save the attempt, and that's pretty cool. So because they're so underpopulated, this is another class. If you want to play Resto, you could probably find a raid spot as a Druid. It's a pretty cool class to play as well. If you want to raid as Feral, just put that out of your mind. Pick a different class, like play Rogue or something else if you want to do physical DPS, and skip the Druid. The other specs were just not viable. Let's move on. Shaman. So this is a horde only class at 1 to 60 in vanilla. There was no Draenei, so there was no Draenei Shaman. You could do Orc or Tauren or Troll Shaman. They're at 60, just like the Druid. You're playing Resto. There's not too many other options. Like, you could do Elemental, you could do Enhancement. Leveling as Enhancement is kind of okay. Leveling as Elemental is usually pretty bad, but usually level as Enhancement for most people that I meet. You can level as Elemental, but there's, it's not quite as strong, I hear. But you're probably going to raid as Resto. And this is the only class I haven't done any serious leveling or like in-game kind of work with in World of Warcraft is the Shaman. So if I have less information, that's why. But every raid wants a lot of Resto Shamans. They're good raid healers, and they bring totems, and the totems are really powerful. You'll have a Shaman in each group to drop Wind Fury for melee that gives them extra attacks. It's a really, really big buff. I don't think Bloodlust was in the game at 1 to 60, so if you're thinking, we'll do the Bloodlust stack like they did in Burning Crusades, like you can't do that. But they're still really, really strong. You have Ghost Wolf at, I believe, level 30, which will let you run around a little bit faster, improve your leveling speed. In general, they're not the best levelers because they don't have as much direct damage to do. You kind of rely on weapon buffs and spells a little bit more, but they're going to be faster than the next class, which is Paladin. I'm going to back up 1 second to Druid. Druid is a really bad experience from 1 to 20, and it's a very bad experience from 1 to 10, and that's because your damage is really bad and you don't have cap form. So you end up going Moonfire, or you Wrath, Moonfire, Bear form from 10 to 20, and it's like slowly kill something. It's really painful to level by yourself from 1 to 20. Once you get past about 25, once you actually have some cat form skills, then leveling Feral, it's quite a bit faster and quite a bit more fun, just to be aware of that. Now, last class, Paladin. This is an alliance only class. It is a class that looks really cool, looks like it's going to be an amazing smash your face kind of class to play, but in vanilla, they were healers. Despite how cool Judgment looks, and despite the fact that this guy's wearing a big, I think this is Ashkandi. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's what it is. Despite the fact that he's got a great two-hander on, he might be spec rat for PvP. When you come to the raid, almost all paladins are restoration. They're all holy paladins. They're all healing paladins. So if you want to play a great raid healer, paladins are good because Flash of Light, a very fast heal. It's very, very efficient. You can spam it on people in the raid and top the charts pretty easily as paladin. As holy, you're an amazing PvP healer, probably the best in the game because it's so hard to kill you, and you have bubble and you have all these different ways to get out of snares. It's a great PvP class if you want to heal. As Ret, you can do quite a bit of damage in PvP and also be hard to kill and have a lot of utility, but do not expect to raid as Ret. There might be a raid paladin in the raid to like judge blessings on, or to judge seals onto bosses, like Seal of Wisdom or something. But you might just have a holy paladin just judge things. Stop healing for a second and go judge it instead of having a rep paladin. So expect to heal at 60. That being said, as far as Alliance goes, it tends to be populated enough that it's not that hard to find a raid spot, especially if you're holy. So keep that in mind. Likewise, it's not hard to find a healing spot if you're a Resto Shaman. It's not hard to find a healing spot if you're a Resto Druid. So those are all the vanilla classes. And you got to remember there was no Death Knight back then or anything like that. And what you can expect from them in terms of their leveling experience and what you need to plan for in-game. So I'm showing the Druid here again. You don't get to play Feral at the end game unless you're starting your own guild and you are dedicated to being a Feral Druid in vanilla. You can make it happen. The problem is getting all the right gear, because you're using like rogue off pieces and you're still not going to do as much damage as a rogue. But you can do whatever you want. The cool thing about vanilla is that there's so many options. Although they shoehorn the tier sets into healing, you can try anything you want, and there's so much different kinds of weird itemized gear. Who knows what you may come up with? You may come up with something that's really interesting and fun to play. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I know this has been a long one. Hopefully it's been a fun one, and I will see you guys maybe on Chronos. Have a good one.